Hi everyone, and welcome to the next chapter from Nimzowicz's My System. This time we'll look at chapter 5, which deals with exchanges. It's a short chapter, but a necessary one if we're going to have a thorough understanding of the text. In the opening of the chapter, Nimzowitsch emphasizes the fact that it is wrong to pursue exchanges too energetically, i.e. simply because there is pressure between pieces is no reason whatsoever to initiate an exchange. He goes on to explain that there are a few specific instances where exchanging is correct, and apart from these, he stresses that exchanging is a bad idea. He mentions again how in earlier chapters we saw examples of exchanges that win a tempo, and of course this is a case of when it can be correct to exchange. Additionally, we also saw that it's wise to exchange in order to avoid retreating or having to make a tempo-wasting defensive move. These were general and more obvious examples. Now we can move on to more specific cases. Firstly, we exchange in order to occupy or open a line without loss of time. The simplest example of what Nimzowitsch is talking about is illustrated in this position here. White, of course, wants to occupy an open file so he can deliver mates, and the back rank is the target. And so, what's the correct way to go about this? Of course, the answer is to exchange. Bishop takes c6. And black cannot recapture because he's going to get mated on e8. But I mean, obviously that's a very simple example, but if he doesn't exchange and plays something else instead, such as bishop f3 to open the file, now simply g6, and black's obviously worse, but he survives longer. Okay, so the second case where an exchange is correct is when it destroys a key defender. For example, pieces that defend a pawn which is preventing the opening of a file, or pieces that are supporting a blockading piece, or pawns that are defending an outpost. Nimzowitsch felt it was worth striving to destroy such defenders in all cases. He then goes on to emphasize that the concept of defender stretches out much further than that. We can also exchange as a defensive measure to defend territory or prevent an approach or infiltration by an enemy piece. Moreover, when your opponent has a centrally posted blockading piece, such as the knight in this position, it too can be considered a great defensive piece in the broader sense, as it has such a good attacking radius all over the board. So in conclusion, the urge to exchange should extend to any defender in the broader sense of the word. Here's another example. It's white to move. If you like, you can pause the video here and try to figure out the winning continuation. It should be fairly obvious that the h2 knight, defended only by the b8 bishop, is very loose. White therefore can win through a series of exchanges of different kinds. First comes e takes d5, so an exchange to open a file without losing time. Black doesn't have to recapture, but let's say he does just to illustrate the point. So c takes d5. Now comes rook e8 check, and this is because the c8 rook is defending the back rank and therefore has to go. It's a good defender. So rook takes e8, rook takes e8, forces king h7, and now the point of this whole line, rook takes b8, and this was the defender of the knight on h2. So rook takes b8, king takes h2, and white should win with correct play. The next example is exchanging in order to avoid losing time retreating. For example, in this position, let's say white plays knight e4, attacking the bishop, and black answers with a4, a counter-attack. Instead of retreating the rook, white, which would give black time to save his bishop, white plays, of course, rook takes b6, and after a takes b6, knight takes f6, and he has a fairly simple win from here. The next section is entitled How and When Exchanges Usually Take Place. Nimzowitsch broke this down into 4 subsections. Firstly, if one player is ahead in material, it always benefits him to initiate exchanges, everything else being equal. Secondly, exchanges take place when both players want the same thing. For example, in this position, e4 is clearly the focus, and sorry, this bishop's meant to be here. E4 is clearly the focus, and white's use of this square is irritating to black, as a knight or any other piece on e4 is good. Thus white defends the outpost as vigorously as he can with his bishop and his castle, and black attacks it as vigorously as he can with his knight and bishop. Eventually, black will exchange down to a slightly worse endgame in order to nullify white's use of this outpost. And a third point is when one player is strong on a given file, in which case an advance down the file should result in exchanges, as the player at the disadvantage cannot allow an invasion, and at the very least must lessen the strength of the invasion through exchanges. So that's a play on an open file. Finally, he adds that weak points and squares tend to be mutually exchanged off by both players, which Nimzowitsch referred to as an exchange of prisoners of war. He gave an example of this play between Bernstein and Perlis at St. Petersburg in 1909, where play had reached this position. It's black to move, and we can see that both sides have various weaknesses. The a2 pawn is backward on an open file, and the b4 pawn, which is doubled and isolated. So play continued with rook a8 attacking a2, and white responds with rook b3. So after rook takes a2 comes rook takes b4. Both sides exchange off their weaknesses, and as it happened, this occurred with the weak pawns on d5 and b7 as well. Play continued rook a5, rook takes b7, rook takes d5. But now came a very nice forced exchange from Bernstein. The rook b8 check. Queen takes b8 is better than king f7. So now comes queen takes d5 check, and after king h8 b3, white went on to win due to this passed b pawn. So we'll finish this chapter by looking at an odds game Nimzowitsch played in a casual coffee house setting in Riga, where he had started the game a queen down for a knight. It's interesting because it looks at some of the themes we have explored in previous chapters as well. Nimzowitsch continued with d5, so a pawn sacrifice to gain squares and space. His opponent, called Druwa, played e takes d5, and now Nimzowitsch sacked a second pawn with e6, and his opponent gladly gobbled up the material, f takes e6. So what is Nimzowitsch up to? The point is that now knight e5 can be played because this square has been cleared, and this is a great attacking square and means that black can't castle, and it also allows bishop h5 check. So we see by sacking these two pawns, all of these pieces are coming to life. Druwa now blundered with knight takes c4, snapping up juicy pawns. White now has a mate in 7 with bishop h5 check, forcing king e7, and here in fact Nimzowitsch also blundered with knight takes c6 check. Correct was the rook f7 immediately, which is forcing mate. However, it made no difference as his opponent recaptured. B takes c6. He should have played king d7, where it's not so clear after knight takes d8, knight takes e3. So b takes c6, rook f7 check, and now the mate is again forced. So king d6, knight takes c4 check, d takes c4 and a move, rook d1 check, forces king e5, bishop f4 check, forces king e4, and now bishop f3, and a very nice mate. So that was chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.